Oh, Stalin was a mighty man, and a mighty man was he. He led the Soviet people on the road to victory. All through the revolution, he fought at Lenin's side, and they made a combination till the day that Lenin died. He said, come on, you people, we must work with brain and hand. And then one day the Nazis came into the Soviet land. They plundered to the Volga, to Stalingrad. And then Joe Stalin said, come on, me boys, and kicked them out again. Oh, Stalin was a southerner, in Georgia he was born, where the oranges grow thick and fast and fields of waving corn. And Stalin is a farmer, his fingers they are green, and he has planted the biggest crop the world has ever seen. One day he looked upon the map and frowned and shook his head. There's too much brown and not enough green, these were the words he said. We'll have to change the weather, boys, he said, and then he smiled. So let's begin by planting trees along 3,000 miles. So Stalin rolled his sleeves up then and said it's time to start. The Volga River and the Don, they are too far apart. I think we'd better join them, so come and help me, pal, and we'll build a mighty waterway, the Volga-Don Canal. Then Stalin went into the north, and there saw rivers three, all emptying their waters into the polar sea. Now that's not right, Joe Stalin said, these rivers, they are ours. We'll turn them round and make them work and make electric power. There was a range of mountains that were standing in the way, so Stalin put his hand out and smoothed them all away. For Joe, he is determined to make the land all green, and that's the biggest project that the world has ever seen. Oh, Stalin is a mighty man, and he has a mighty plan. He's harnessed nature to the plow to work for the good of man. He's hammered out the future, the forgeman he has been, and he's made the worker state the best the world has ever seen.
전체의 사회주의를 우리 어떻게 정대로 지키는가를 세계여보라. 조선은 결심하면 한다. 조선은 한다면 한다. 국민 백성의 영도 따라서 전군의 붉은 기 그 신념으로 조선은 결심하면 한다. 조선은 한다면 한다. 조체의 강성대국을 우리 어떻게 이 땅에 세우는가를 세계여보라. 조선은 결심하면 한다. 조선은 한다면 한다. 장군님의 뜻을 받들어 붉은의 정신력 그 배짱으로 조선은 결심하면 한다. 조선은 한다면 한다. 결심하면 한다. 조선 한다면 한다. Ягод негнар тим терекчи
Jaltin daragette bozzima Adangini oncisem Adacimin oncisem Nește bunii zoste hung Nerinci atar huyoşu
Le Vietnam brûle et moi je hurle Mao Mao. Johnson rigole et moi je vole Mao Mao. Le napalm coule et moi je roule Mao Mao. Les villes crèvent et moi je rêve Mao Mao. Les putains crient et moi je ris Mao Mao. Le riz est fou et moi je joue Mao Mao.
C'est le petit
L'impérialisme dicte partout sa loi. La révolution n'est pas un dîner. La bomba est un tigre en papier. Les masses sont les véritables héros. Les ricains tuent et moi je mue Mao Mao. Les fous sont rois et moi je bois Mao Mao. Les bombes tonnent et moi je sonne Mao Mao. Les bébés fuient et moi je fuis Mao Mao. Les Russes mangent et moi je danse Mao Mao. Diable dénonce, je renonce Mao Mao.
C'est le petit livre rouge qui fait que tout enfin bouge.
La base de l'armée, c'est le soldat. Le vrai pouvoir est au bout du fusil. Les monstres seront tous anéantis. L'ennemi ne périt pas de lui-même. Mao Mao. Mao Mao. Mao Mao. Mao Mao.
When I was young, I used to be as fine a man as ever you'd see at the Prince of Wales. He said to me, come and join the British Army. Tooraloo, they're looking for monkeys up at the zoo. It says, one, if I had a face like you, I'd join the British Army. Sarah Connon baked a cake, and so for poor old Slattery sake, sure I threw myself into the lake, pretending I was barmy. Tooraloo, I've made me mind up what to do. Now I'll work me ticket home to you and the British Army. Sergeant Healy went away and his wife got in the family way, and the only words that she could say was blame the British Army. Tooraloo, me curse upon the Labour Blue that took me darling boy from me to join the British Army. Corporal Sheen is a terrible note, just give him a couple of jars of stout and he beat the enemy with his mouth and save the British Army. Tooraloo, I've made me mind up what to do. Now I'll work me ticket home to you and the British Army.
Ich trage eine Fahne und diese Fahne ist rot. Es ist die Arbeiterfahne, die Vater trug durch die Not. Die Fahne ist niemals gefallen, so oft auch der Träger fiel. Sie weht heute über uns allen und zieht schon der Sehnsucht Ziel. Ich trage eine Fahne, das Rot der Arbeiter macht. Es hat die Arbeiterfahne bei Nacht mein Vater bewacht und hat sie mir früh übergeben, als Morgenrot stieg empor, dass wir sie zur Sonne heben, bei Tag in der Kampf beschworen. Ich trage eine Fahne und diese Fahne ist rot. Es ist die Arbeiterfahne, die uns die Einheit gebot. Sie hat unsere Väter begleitet durch Bade und Nacht und Krieg. Drum vorwärts die Söhne erstreiten, zu Ende den großen Sieg.
веселый раз. Эй, ухнем, еще разик, еще раз. Разовьем мы березу, разовьем мы кудряву. Ой да дай да, ой да дай да, разовьем мы кудряву. Утреннего в жизни важен первый шаг. Слышишь, веют над страною ветры яростных атак. И вновь продолжается бой, и сердцу тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. Весть летит во все концы, вы поверьте нам, отцы, будут новые победы, станут новые бойцы. Милости не жди, жизнь для правды не щади. Нам, ребята, в этой жизни только с правдой по пути.
Welcome back, everybody. It is an interview show we've got for you today. I'm joined now by Dan Kovalik, who we've had on the program before about 18 months ago, I believe. Dan is a long-time political activist in the United States and internationally as well. He's also the author of several books, including The Case for Palestine, Cancel This Book, and The Plot to Overthrow Venezuela. But we are talking to him today about his experiences in West Asia, particularly in Lebanon, and his knowledge of the Palestinian liberation struggle, which has been again brought to the forefront of our imaginations by the recent, shall we say, outbursts of a certain Mr. Trump. So, Dan, welcome back to the program today.
Thanks, Alexander. Appreciate it.
And Dan, if we jump straight into this, because you have, of course, you've written a book entitled The Case of Palestine. You've been traveling extensively around the West Asian region in recent weeks. You've seen and spoken to a lot of people on the ground who've been involved in the struggle against Israeli colonialism and U.S. imperialism. So let's start with the comments of the man who is the president of the United States, and his claim that he wants the U.S. to take possession of Gaza and clear the population. Can I just ask for your response when you heard that, and what do you think Trump's actual game is by coming out with these pronouncements, which even European vassal state leaders are denouncing as outrageous?
Yes, well, it certainly is outrageous. I would say I was shocked to some extent, but, you know, Trump says so many crazy things, you start losing, you know, your ability to be surprised. First of all, it has to be pointed out that this was the game plan all along. I mean, there were early plans released, I guess leaked even from the Israeli government, in which they said that their goal was to push the people of Gaza into the Sinai Peninsula of Egypt. And apparently, Joe Biden even offered President Sisi of Egypt a lot of money, I guess in the form of debt relief, to take the people of Gaza into the Sinai Peninsula. So, in a way, this is not anything new, except that Trump has added that the U.S. would control what was left of Gaza and reconstruct it. I guess make it a giant casino or a gambling town on the Mediterranean. So that needs to be pointed out. Now, President Sisi had rejected that and resisted that early on. To his credit, he's not done much else for the people of Palestine, that must be said, but he did do that. He did resist that. And it's very clear he, at least for the moment, plans to resist this. I mean, the entire Arab League is very clear. They oppose this. As you said, even the Europeans are saying they oppose it. Even the Western press, the U.S. press, feigned being shocked when he said this. Again, even though it's not really that new, in the thought processes. The question, I guess the big question a lot of us ask is he serious? I mean, right now there's a ceasefire that's largely holding in Gaza, thank God. I mean, the people of Gaza desperately need this. They need peace. They need incredible amounts of humanitarian aid. And every day that this lasts, it's great for them. Does Trump plan on sending U.S. troops to force these people out? He kind of suggested maybe, but then he seemed to backtrack from that. That's never going to happen. I think you have U.S. troops mutinying. This is not a war that Americans are going to fight. I mean, I'm very certain of this, that there's enough opposition to this in the American public. This would be less popular than the Vietnam War, in my view. This would be the end of the empire, I think. That's my opinion. So while again, this seems to have been the plan all along, while I do think Israel would like to get rid of everyone in Gaza and everyone in the West Bank, for that matter. I mean, I think that's been the goal all along. I mean, that's why we've said this is ethnic cleansing, this is genocide, because this has always been the goal, right? It would take much more bloodletting for that to happen. I mean, we've already seen, 15 months of brutality. I mean, just unspeakable brutality against the people of Gaza. It would take many, many more months of that to do what they want to do, because the people of Gaza ain't leaving. They're not leaving on their own free will. So I'm not really sure what all that means. As people pointed out, the fact that he said it is shocking and upsetting, and should be upsetting to people. I mean, because he really is stating the intention to carry out ethnic cleansing and really to carry out genocide, because one component of genocide is the forcible transfer of populations of certain groups, protected groups, which the Palestinians are, from their territory, if the intent is to destroy in whole or in part that group. And I think that is the intent here. So the fact that he's openly saying it in a way that Biden would never do that, or Kamala Harris would never say that, is reprehensible on one hand. But on the other hand, I think, the world might as well know what the true game plan is. I mean, I think that kind of truth wakes people up. I think Biden's pretending and Harris pretending for months, we're working so hard towards a ceasefire. we care so much about the Palestinian civilians. That was all bullshit. We all knew it was bullshit, but it gave them some pretense, right, of not sharing the genocidal intent of Israel. Now there's no way to do that. Okay, now we know where the U.S. stands on all this. So there you go. Those are my initial thoughts on all that.
Well, your response to that, Dan, does bring up another question, which is the war and its duration, which was, as you said, 15 months long, and led to, well, the number of deaths we don't know precisely and won't know precisely, I think, for quite some time, in terms of the number of Palestinians in Gaza killed by the Israeli regime during that time period. But I wanted to sort of float my interpretation of why it lasted so long to you, and to get the benefit of your experience in terms of your opinion on this. It seems to me that when October the 7th happened, and then the Israelis went full-blown genocidal rampage, shall we say, went for a full-blown genocidal rampage in Gaza, the U.S. The administration, run nominally by Biden, but in reality with a lot of the decisions being made by Antony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, and various others, saw an opportunity to crush what they regarded as troublesome opposition to their Middle East policy, meaning Hamas in Gaza, meaning Hezbollah in Lebanon, meaning also the Syrian government, which we'll come to separately later on, and perhaps also meaning Iran itself. You can throw in Yemen into the mix as well. So is perhaps one of the reasons why the war was allowed to go on as long as it did was the belief amongst some within the US administration and wider US political system that this was an opportunity to crush the regional resistance movements to not just Israel, but to US power in the region. What do you think of that as an interpretation, Dan?
Well, it certainly seems that way. And again, I do think Blinken was probably the intellectual author of most of this. I think he seemed to be in charge of this aspect of the U.S. government, because we know that Joe Biden basically was MIA, I think, for the last, I don't know how long, but certainly last year, because of his mental capacity. And it appeared that Blinken was calling the shots, and he is a rabid Zionist. So I think his goal, along with Netanyahu, and he shared it, Netanyahu's goal was to settle this once and for all, in their view, to allow Israel to, as you say, defeat its enemies, Hezbollah, Hamas, possibly Iran, though, that would take a lot longer. And, there was some, Israel had some success in that regard. They certainly weakened Hezbollah quite a bit. I mean, we have to admit that. With the pager attacks, the killing of Nasrallah, and I think the ceasefire in Lebanon came about in part because Hezbollah was weakened. I think Israel was weakened too. So, I mean, it was a mutual, they both kind of needed it, but certainly Hezbollah, I think, needed it. As for Hamas, I don't think they've really been weakened. It doesn't appear that they have been. I mean, they may be even stronger than they were. So that, I'm sure, frustrated Israel quite a bit, and again, led to it going on longer because they were not able to make inroads into weakening Hamas. And they certainly lost big time in the propaganda war. I mean, clearly, Israel now is a pariah state in the eyes of most people in the world. And that's never going to change now. And I think they know that. And by the way, I think that's what made them even more desperate, like that they had to carry out the final solution. And I don't use those terms lightly, but I mean, really, like the Germans, I think their final solution is certainly to get rid of the Palestinian people off of the land of historic Palestine. And I think that's what one of the goals was. I mean, again, we said it was a genocide. Like, we didn't just say that. Like, that was the goal. And so, in addition to trying to weaken Hamas and Hezbollah, they were trying to wipe out the Palestinian people.
Yes.
And the Palestinian people showed themselves to be incredibly resilient.
Yes.
And again, I think that frustrated Israel greatly. I mean, I think right now Israel is in a state of incredible frustration because they see Hamas flourishing. You know, you see all these pictures of the Hamas fighters in the streets. Miraculously, the hostages that were released by Hamas are in great shape. Like, how is that even possible? Given the fact that Israel was denying the Gaza Strip food and water and medicine, and somehow Hamas was able to take care of these people. And now you have people who were driven from the north, who've now returned to the north. They've shown themselves to be an incredibly stubborn people, right? And so now, of course, Israel accomplished one big goal, and that was it has made the Gaza Strip virtually unlivable. I mean, the infrastructure's gone. There's virtually no hospitals or clinics or schools, infrastructure, homes. I mean, all that's largely gone. There's no fresh water supplies. I mean, that's a huge issue. And again, that was by design. And that, by the way, I understand water is one thing that is not being brought into the Gaza Strip in big amounts. That's a huge issue for the people right now. And so I think the hope was if we make it unlivable, then the result is what Trump is saying. They will want to go or have to go because they can't live there anymore.
Yes.
But again, even the fact that people return to the north to destroyed homes and all this shows, well, that's going to be easier said than done. These people are not going to leave just because it's a barren wasteland.
Yes.
So the fact is it took 15 months to get to where we are, but it would take another 15 months or more if Israel wants to finish that plan and wants to carry out the plan that Trump enunciated. And I honestly think the world, I don't think they're going to tolerate that. I think a round two of this is going to be resisted harder by the Arab world, even by Europe. I think Europe is pretty disgusted with this. Most European countries, anyway. So we'll see. We'll see. I mean, so I think, in a way, Trump's statement takes a little heat off of Netanyahu, right? So he can return and say, well, Trump's going to take care of this, guys. We don't even have to take care of it, right?
Yes.
So we're going to leave it in his good hands, and don't bother me about it. You know?
Yeah.
And we'll see. We'll just see how that works, if it works. It's a very interesting time, but I have a certain amount of cautious hope that Gaza will survive somehow. That was not always clear that was going to happen. And we'll see if the ceasefires hold in Gaza and in Lebanon. I mean, again, all that remains to be seen. I think a lot will depend on the domestic political situation in Israel, really, and what Netanyahu feels he needs to do to cling to power.
Well, that was going to be my next follow-up question, Dan, which is that this seems to be a very public and embarrassing failure for Netanyahu, who was loudly trumpeting that he was going to eliminate Hamas and has been not only unable to eliminate them, but apparently barely touched them, it would seem, in terms of the actual fighting. So he has very publicly failed, and this will, to my read of it, lead to a greater degree of political instability inside Israel, which is reeling also from the economic shockwaves of the war and the very successful Yemeni blockade of the Red Sea. And so, what is your read on the situation inside Israel itself? Is this something which is going to further deteriorate as time goes on, and the shock of seeing the forces of Hamas almost completely untouched by months and months of destruction, able to parade around in Gaza and essentially claim a deserved victory? How is this going to play out in terms of the instability inside Israel?
I think Israel will continue to decline and destabilize economically and socially and politically. And in part, that's because a couple of the big myths that Israel was founded on and has lived off of for years have been obliterated. You know, first of all, the idea that that Israel's the perennial victim. Well, that doesn't really seem to be the case now. And that they're kind of the good guys because of that. That, again, they don't seem like the good guys, and they know a lot of the world doesn't view them that way, and that has to impact their own self-perception. I mean, I think a lot of those folks in Israel are realizing, oh, I guess we're not the good guys. Okay, and I think that's huge. I mean, every country wants to view themselves as the good guys, but I think Israel's, in particular, needs that narrative to keep going. So that's one thing. But in the other myth is that they were, undefeatable.
Yes.
And they got their asses handed to them by guys running around in flip-flops. And they know that. And you had, thousands of Israeli casualties, hundreds of Israeli deaths at least. We don't really know what the numbers are because they're not open about that. And a lot of suicides by Israeli soldiers who I think probably killed themselves from a mix of both fear but also disgust at what they did. I mean, I imagine that I don't believe that people can do what those people did and live with themselves in the end. And I think a lot couldn't. So I think all those things combined, I think Israel's perception of itself is changing. I think they're going to feel less and less good about themselves. They're going to feel less and less welcome in the world. And, they've always depended on, substantial immigration just to maintain the society. And that's not going to happen. People aren't going to move to Israel, especially the young people, because the young people realize this ain't so great. Israel isn't so great. They're not good. They're not the good guys. And also, by the way, they can't keep us safe, right? The whole myth was, or the whole point of Israel was that there would be a homeland for Jews where Jews would be safe. Well, Israelis, it's been proven, are not safe there, right? I mean, Hezbollah, Iran, Hamas, Yemen, all of them were able to attack Israel in very significant ways.
Yes.
And so this idea that it's a secure and safe homeland, well, that's gone too. So why would anyone move there? I mean, let's face it, you wouldn't. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. So they have a big problem. I mean, I think in the medium to long term, Israel is in trouble. And whether they can patch things over in the short term, I don't know. But in the long term, I think they're in deep trouble. And again, especially because the world is just, they're sick of Israel. I mean, they're going to be uninvited more and more to world sporting events and entertainment events, and they're going to get less entertainers to come there. It's like South Africa. A lot of people made that comparison. It's like apartheid South Africa.
Yeah. Well, the sporting and entertainment boycott was quite effective on the apartheid regime in South Africa, precisely because it was trying to normalize itself and sort of shed the the overtly fascist stylings into the 1980s, and by getting, I don't know, Paul Simon and Queen to go and play Sun City or something. But the Israeli regime has very much tried to use music and entertainment as part of its legitimation process. So I think that those people who called out and made the lives of these foolish musicians uncomfortable who want to go and play there and not be questioned about it, that's a worthy endeavor in itself. To turn to just the international opposition to the Israeli regime, Dan. Now, Trump has also, and his cabinet members have been raving away about the need to repress the pro-Palestine movement inside the United States domestically. Of course, this was also Biden's policy. Everybody would like to, a lot of people would like to forget that. Trump, of course, is now in his usual style. He's saying openly and crudely and fuggishly what Biden and Blinken and others did under the table. So, isn't this though a significant risk for Trump and those who back him, in that if he does license Israel to go on another genocidal rampage, isn't that taking a huge risk with regard to political stability inside the United States itself, given that for all that Trump won an election, he's still not a popular president. He more spoke to the sheer unpopularity and the utter hatred for Biden and the Democrats more than it did for Trump. And of course, more Americans just didn't vote for anybody than voted for either party. So would this not be a risk, too big a risk to potentially take for a US administration? One, licensing a renewed genocide, and two, trying to suppress quite a large-scale domestic political opposition to this.
I do think that that's a huge risk, in part because he at least seemed to run on a platform of wanting to end the wars. Right. So now if he did send troops to Gaza, I mean, that would be really starting a new war for the US. I mean, we were supporting it militarily, but to actually send troops there, that would be a huge Rubicon that was crossed. And I think, again, as I said, I think people would be furious about that. I think you'd have mass mutinies and whatnot. I think that would be very dangerous for him and the military-industrial complex. The U.S. has been very smart since Vietnam. They learned a lot from Vietnam, and that is, you don't put your own soldiers at risk in theater against a guerrilla organization like the Viet Minh, or in this case, Hamas. You don't draft people because you end up sending people to war who don't want to fight. And you get much more opposition to the war because everyone has skin in the game, right? And to the extent you can, you get proxies to do your dirty work for you. And in the case of Israel, we have Israel to do it, So if if he carries through a threat for the U.S. to get directly involved in Gaza, he's violated all three of those lessons, because he would have to draft as well, because again, it's just not going to fly with this volunteer army to do that. So, and yes, I think that the student movement and general protest movement would grow if he had direct involvement. And I think the attempt to suppress that opposition would itself cause a backlash, right? So he would be playing with fire if he did those things. So we'll see.
Yeah. Certainly, it's something which it would seem to go against Trump's actual record, because even though he talks this like very grandiose, often apocalyptic, in his apocalyptic manner, in actual fact, it would seem from my read of him, like he's actually much more cautious and circumspect than his words give the impression of being. I don't think that he particularly would want to own that mess that he would create by sending like the US Marine Corps into Gaza and then the inevitable casualties that would follow. It would have a very severe impact upon him politically, might even see a rebellion of certain aspects of his own base as well, given that Israel's popularity. I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong about this, Dan. It seems to me that the popularity of Israel within the United States is confined to two particular groups: the rabidly Zionist Jewish section of the population, which in itself is by no means as powerful as it used to be within American Jewry, and then you have the sort of hardline Protestant fundamentalist types who
The
basically,
Christian Zionist.
yeah. The Christian Zionist types, they actually seem to be more influential inside the Republican Party than the Zionist, the Jewish groups do. But that doesn't seem to me to be enough in terms of numbers of the population that would support such a move to have a secure base to do it from. But what's your impression of that in terms of Israel's support within the United States? How deep does it actually go?
Yeah, well, I would say before October 7th, it went fairly deep, even if it wasn't, I mean, I think most Americans were basically supportive of Israel because they were told to be supportive of Israel. Again, even if they weren't a Zionist or whatever. I do think after these 15 months, those types of people are, a lot of them have changed their mind. Like, oh, now that I know what Israel is, no, I actually don't support it. I think that, I think a lot of people have been horrified by what's happened, and are really shocked because they did think Israel that they were the good guys, really, and and that's just patently not true. So again, I think when you look at where we are right now, I do not think there would be broad support for a direct intervention in Gaza. I mean, especially because with social media and even with the mainstream press, I don't see how the mainstream press could avoid cataloging the atrocities that would happen there. I mean, if they did, they would be out of business. I mean, one way or another, people would see heavily armed U.S. troops murdering people who are completely defenseless, mostly women and children. This is not going to fly. It didn't fly in Vietnam. It's not going to fly here.
Yeah.
So it's cockamamie. I mean, in the end, it's a cockamamie idea. I don't. It's hard for me to take him seriously in saying that. It's just.
Well,
yeah.
I think it's probably more a case of Trump trying to give political cover to Netanyahu than it is anything in reality. Like you said, it's giving him something to take back to, Ben Gvir, Smotrich, and the others to say, look, we've got this. And Trump says, as you point out, that he's going to he will take care of it for us. Basically, I see it more of as a desperate ploy to stabilize a now destabilized Israeli colonial project, which if it was to implode, and I want to get your opinion on this, Dan, if it was to come to an end in whatever way that happened, that would be basically curtains for US and British influence in the West Asian region, given that Israel, and before it, the Zionist colonial project, was backed by the British imperialists for the specific reason of wanting to disrupt and destroy any move towards Arab unity. So if they lost that, then that would be a catastrophic blow to the US and the British in particular. So is the US's immediate game here desperately trying to stabilize the Zionist project in the hope that something will come up further on down the line that will enable them to further re-entrench it? But it looks like they're in a losing game now, doesn't it?
It does, but just thinking about this as we're talking, I mean, would it be so catastrophic for U.S. influence? I mean, let's face it, Israel. I mean, a lot of policymakers in the U.S. think that. But Israel has at best been a double-edged sword for the United States, right? They've done as much to inspire hatred in the Middle East against the United States in the West as anything, right? The U.S. still has a big tool at its disposal, and that's money. I mean, Egypt is on board, even with the U.S., not because it supports our policy in Palestine, but because we give it a lot of money. And we give Jordan a lot of money. I mean, we buy a lot of these countries off. That would not be prevented if Israel fell. And I mean, I think ultimately that's what I think non-ideological policymakers in Washington, non-Zionists, at some point are going to say, is this worth it for us?
Yes.
Prop up this pariah state that, inspires, again, all this anti-Western hatred in West Asia and beyond. And, there's other ways for the U.S. to protect its interests there. I mean, look at again. You talked about Yemen, and Yemen's blocking the shipping there. Well, that was because of Israel's and the U.S.'s policies in Gaza. I mean, they're not going to do that anymore if Israel collapses, right? I mean, the point is, like, the U.S., is a hammer and sees every problem, therefore, as a nail. But that is not a proper way to view the world. Other countries don't view it that way. Like China is a great, they exert influence by building speed trains, right? We exert influence by war. And I think the U.S., the more rational view is how China does things. And I'd like to think that maybe that kind of viewpoint could become, predominant in the U.S. Now, I don't have any hope that's going to happen soon. There's a lot of reasons it wouldn't. A lot of people are making billions and billions of dollars on war. But Israel itself is a frenemy. They're not essential to U.S. policy, I think, in my own view. I know that a lot of people see it that way, but I think, again, they're at best a double-edged sword.
Well, I think that eventually the cost-benefit analysis will be done, and it will not be favorable to the Zionist regime ultimately. It's as you say, it's a question of when that happens. When does the penny drop with various characters in Washington that they could pursue their interests and attempt to spread their influence in other ways rather than just relying on this failing and flailing, ultimately creation of the British Empire, and move beyond it. I think eventually the Zionists will end up like the South Vietnamese and others who thought that they were there forever, friends forever. Various U.S. presidents go to South Vietnam, went ultimately to Afghanistan until 5 years ago, said we're there with you till the bitter end, and then the bitter end came, and the U.S. government simply walked off. So that I think that day will probably come. It's just a question of when and how much damage can the Zionist entity do on the way down. And further to that point, Dan, I wanted to just shift in emphasis slightly to look at, you mentioned the case of Lebanon earlier, which is a case of a country which has been held down by imperialism and stopped from developing for its entire modern existence, I would say. Welcome your impressions on that. And the war that was waged there against Hezbollah really seemed to be a case of the Israelis, and behind them the US, ultimately with the British and the French on board as well, throwing everything they could at Hezbollah to try and divorce it physically, sever the link between it and the Lebanese masses into which it is embedded, and to, of course, annihilate its leadership in the hope that a decapitation strategy would cause it to collapse. So the ultimate, you've talked a little bit about the ceasefire before and why that was accepted, but having looked at this up close, Dan, what was your impression of the damage done by Israel in the war against Hezbollah, and also the damage done to Israel in return?
Yeah, well, first of all, I've been to Lebanon now twice in the last maybe 6 weeks or so. And I just actually made it to South Lebanon before I left, which was a great trip. My impression is that the support Hezbollah, everyone who supported Hezbollah to begin with still supports them. Okay, they feel very much like Hezbollah fought for them, fought for Lebanon, fought for the Palestinians, and that they acquitted themselves quite well. Okay, and I think, truthfully, they probably gained some support too. I really don't think they lost any support. I think, if anything, they gained some support even amongst others who maybe didn't support them before, because, again, they were the ones that defended the homeland. The Lebanese military does nothing to defend the homeland. Okay, that needs to be pointed out. They are a total colonial quisling army. Even now, as we speak, and I witnessed this, they're preventing Lebanese from returning to the south. Right? They're actually kind of aiding and abetting Israel's attempts to take over parts of South Lebanon. And I think Hezbollah is seen as the force that defends Lebanon in general. I think Lebanon also, I think people did appreciate that Hezbollah was willing to swallow this peace deal, this ceasefire, even though it didn't accomplish what it wanted, and that was to end the genocide in Gaza. Right? That's why the war of Hezbollah against Israel started this time. It wasn't about Lebanon. It was about the people of Gaza. And they agreed to a ceasefire before the ceasefire in Gaza was even expected. But they did so, I believe, yes, in part because they were weakened, but I also think because, as one of my friends, Paul LaRuti, good guy, been an activist for a lot longer than I have. He's a lot older than I am. In that region, said, because they know Lebanon is not for them to sacrifice. Lebanon was being sacrificed. Israel was bombing Beirut. They were bombing other parts of Lebanon that had nothing to do with Hezbollah, right? And Hezbollah knew, from a really a moral point of view, and I think they're a very moral organization, that they couldn't allow that to go on. They could not keep fighting this battle that was endangering the entire nation. And I think people realized that they made that calculus and appreciate that they quit when they knew that it could get really, really ugly for Lebanon. So I think Hezbollah is not in terrible shape. I think they have been rearming. People feared that because of the rise of HTS and the fall of Assad that they wouldn't be able to get arms. But apparently, at least in the current situation where basically HTS is not governing huge swaths of the country just because it can't, that arms are getting through anyway, right? Yes. I mean, it's like the wild, wild west, apparently. They're like selling arms in markets by the pound, I understand. So I think they've had no problems getting rearmed. I think they have no problem recruiting new recruits.
Yes.
So I think they'll be ready. Now, in terms of Lebanon, the political situation, it needs to be pointed out, they have a new president that was handpicked by the United States. Literally, the U.S. ambassador was on the floor of the parliament, picking this guy. And he was picked in contravention of the Lebanon's own constitution.
Right.
Because he was an active military general at the time he was selected to be president.
Hmm.
And the Constitution requires if you hold a position like that, you need to be retired for at least 2 years. And why? They don't want military rule. They don't want military coups.
Hmm.
This is a good idea.
Hmm.
And yet he was picked in contravention of that because he was an active military guy at the time he was chosen. And the prime minister was also chosen in that way, also with the input of Saudi Arabia.
Hmm.
So you have a government in Lebanon that is, again, very much beholden to the Western powers.
Hmm.
The U.S. is now, you know this from Craig Murray, who's done some good work on this, that the U.S. is now building the second largest embassy in the world in Beirut.
Never a good sign.
Never a good sign.
Hmm.
So, again, the truth is outside Hezbollah, you don't have a government that, one, is functioning much at all.
Hmm.
And to the extent it is, it's not functioning on behalf of the Lebanese people. Hezbollah really represents the Lebanese people better than the government does, you know. So now the big danger Lebanon is in now, I think, is it could come from Syria. And that is because you have the HTS has taken over Syria. They are basically pawns of the U.S. and Israel and Turkey, right? They are anathema to Hezbollah because they resent Hezbollah. Hezbollah fought on the side very actively of Assad. And they've already, there's been fighting between forces in Lebanon and the HTS in border areas. So, and the problem is that between HTS and also Israel, that's now also taken over some of the border region, including Mount Hermon, which is the highest point in all of the Levant.
Yes.
Now, for the first time, while Hezbollah only had to defend the south of Lebanon, they now have to defend the entire, land boundaries of Lebanon because they could be invaded from Syria by HTS and or Israel or some other militant group. So that makes defending Lebanon a lot harder, right? They're going to have to be spread out more potentially.
Yes.
And the other thing apparently that's happening, as I said, that while Hezbollah has had no problems rearming by getting arms shipments out of Syria, apparently there's some, jihadist type extremist groups in Lebanon that have also been getting arms that way. So what is that going to do to Lebanon? Are they going to have an HTS type group emerge that could challenge Hezbollah and or the government, So, I mean, there's a lot of question marks. I think Lebanon is much more vulnerable today after the fall of Assad than it was for those reasons.
Yes. Well, that does lead us to raise the question of Syria, Dan, because the Syrian government, as many viewers will know, because we've covered it here on multiple occasions before, survived over a decade of war and sanctions imposed by principally the US and the European Union, and was literally had the life almost strangled out of it by a combination of brute violence and economic siege warfare. Eventually, this leads to the rapid collapse of the Syrian government following what seems to me to be a fairly, not a huge size incursion by HTS from the north. In fact, there were some stories that you may have seen, Dan, about how the HTS leadership, in reality, it seems to be Turkish military intelligence who stand behind them, were rather surprised at the rapidity of the Syrian collapse. So I want to take this issue with you first, Dan, which is that what was your interpretation of an analysis of the with the reasons for that rapid collapse of the Syrian government. What was it? Just the accumulation of too many problems from over a decade of war and sanctions? Was there a more, should we say, underhanded game going on there? What was your understanding of that you've?
Yeah. There's a few different theories. I mean, first of all, I think yes, there's no question that the years of brutal war combined with the sanctions, combined with the U.S. occupation of northwest Syria, which is the most oil-rich and grain-rich, all of that combined to weaken the Syrian state, to weaken the economy, and to weaken the military.
Yes.
Because the soldiers were getting paid, peanuts. And so what does that allow to happen? It allows soldiers to be bribed. It allows officers to be bribed. And it is thought that there was some people near the top who were probably bought off, and that they in some way paved the way for HTS's quick march onto Damascus. And I think that's probably true. I think that Assad did not do some things he had to do to have prevented this. He was told by Lavrov he had to do some things. He had to pay his soldiers more. He had to make some political reforms in order to ease his political isolation. And also he was being told by Iranian and Russian intelligence that HTS was mounting an offensive. And he didn't believe them. He said, no, this is just regular troop movement. And so he was a bit caught unawares, I believe. And I think, at least what I was told, is Russia told him at some point that if he were to live and not suffer the fate of Gaddafi, he just has to leave, because the country could not be defended at that point. Russia... Both Russia and Iran have made it clear, look, they were willing to defend Syria if the Syrians were willing to defend themselves, but they weren't going to do it. They weren't going to fight the war entirely for them. And again, I think while there were a lot of Syrians ready to fight, and I know that because I know some Syrian soldiers who were ready to fight and are very upset about what happened. I think a lot of the Syrian armed forces were demoralized, impoverished, and again, just weren't up for that fight. For all the reasons we said. So I think more will come to light. I think we don't know all the behind the scenes things that happened. But yeah, HTS, I think it can't even be said that they had some big military victory. They more or less marched into Damascus. By the time they got to Damascus, they were basically unopposed. So, and I think they surprised themselves, and it remains to be seen whether they have the will or ability to govern. They exist as a tool by the West to topple Assad. Well, they've done that. So now what are they going to do? Well, and I think no one knows.
Well, partly, I mean, they have announced some of what they intend to do. I mean, the new foreign minister was at Davos the other day, and in a very, very friendly sit down with a certain Sir Anthony Charles Linton Blair, better known as Tony Blair, promising to dismantle Syrian Ba'athist socialism. That was probably the reason why he was invited. And Giuliani, or whatever his real name is, has been to meet Mohammed bin Salman to either receive promises or make promises about certain things. And Erdogan has been in Damascus or has met with Giuliani quite recently, this week in fact. And Giuliani promised to allow the Turkish military to open bases in northern Syria. And as you said, Dan, the Israelis have already grabbed a significant portion of southern Syria. So it seems that Giuliani and co are interested basically in just, doing whatever it is that their paymasters tell them to do. Syria itself seems to be being pulled apart by Turkish interests in the north, Israeli interests in the south, and myriad other interests right in the middle. So the question that flows from that is that, well, how stable is this post-Assad situation going to be, even for the imperialist West? Because you have differing interests between Turkey, the Kurdish groups, and with the US behind them. Trump has expressed various different opinions on whether the US is going to stay there. Then you have the Israelis in the south with God knows what kind of agenda, none of it good. And you have a lot of, as you said, former Syrian army soldiers who were ideologically committed to defending the Syrian Arab Republic, who feel very let down, but also aren't going to give up the fight. So it seems that the rule of Giuliani is an unstable one, which is also sees him exposed as being very heavily dependent upon his foreign backers, to the point of handing over significant parts of Syrian land to them potentially. So what is your view on the potential stability of the rule of Giuliani and HTS?
Yeah, well, again, I think there is a big reason to doubt whether he can hold on to power. Um, did you see, in terms of ceding land, did you see, I just saw this morning, The Cradle, which is a great publication, they reported that the Syrian Interior Ministry just released a new map of Syria that does not include the Golan Heights. Also does not include a part in the north that Turkey's taken over. That literally they've seemed to have officially ceded those areas away. So I totally agree with you that they are nothing but kind of a conduit of these foreign powers to do what those foreign powers want with Syria. It's going to be balkanized, I think. And I fear there will not be a unified Syrian state, or a unified Syrian country as we've known it. I think it could end up looking a lot like Libya after the overthrow of Gaddafi, or like Yugoslavia after it was balkanized. And yes, so what does that mean? Even if Giuliani rules, what is he ruling over? What's left? Palmyra is apparently taken over by ISIS, which is no longer allied with Giuliani. So that's a city that seems to be going some other direction. Aleppo will probably be large. I think Turkey has designs on Aleppo. So, I think, again, what is left of Syria is uncertain. And it makes me very sad. I mean, because it was a once great nation. And I think it's been so damaged by the war, by the sanctions, by religious divisions that didn't exist before, but that the West, exacerbated and fueled. And it's a mess. It's a disaster, really. It is a disaster.
And I see that one development today, I wasn't sure if you've seen this, Dan, is that the French are making a big move in Syria. They've been handed rights over one of the port cities on the coast of Syria, and are apparently looking to re-establish some sort of influence there. So Emmanuel Macron finally gets to play Napoleon, albeit in a much diminished way. So it was, and also a familiar figure from British politics, a somewhat loathsome man by the name of Alistair Campbell, who you may be familiar with, was over there giving the full podcast treatment to Giuliani, praising his moderation, his determination to fight terrorism. So it's pretty clear who the puppet masters are behind him. Again, though, like whether that will lead to anything other than more instability and chaos is, of course, yet to be decided. It certainly doesn't look good. But in terms of the plans of imperialism for the region, I think it does come down to what you were talking about, which is the breaking up larger states and balkanizing them, quite literally, has been the plan for quite a long time, not just with regard to Syria, but many nations, which is that larger nations, even ones that were once created as the Middle Eastern nations are by Sykes-Picot and drawing lines on maps 100 years ago. But those nations are too big and too unwieldy to control all at once. So better to break them down into 1,000 different parts and essentially pick over the ruins, which is what imperialism seems to want to do. A plan that they, of course, tried and so far have failed to apply to a giant nation such as Russia.
Right.
But it seems that the only thing that the imperialist countries have to bring to the table with regard to certainly West Asia is fragmentation, asset stripping, and furthering of more and more religious divisions in order to precariously balance themselves on these countries. There's nothing. You mentioned China earlier. I mean, this is the reason why the US and the British and the French have lost so much trade in terms of countries choosing to trade with China, is that China brings an actual offer to the table in terms of development. Britain brings asset stripping and psychological operations, and so does the US, so does the Europeans. So it's no wonder, is it, that they are losing out in this battle and don't seem to know how to change tactics to do anything differently.
No, it's true. I mean, it is, yes, the modern goal of Western colonialism is to create chaos. And in that chaos, they believe they have a better chance of stealing other countries' resources, exploiting their labor, right? It used to be, I've said that, it used to be that the West would like, what they would do is support some strong man in a country to help facilitate those goals of resource extraction, labor exploitation. But then they realized, for example, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, or at that point it was Zaire, that even a guy like Mobutu, who was their pawn, at least at some point, in order to stay in power, he had to do something for his own people, right? He had to tax some of these companies. He had to provide some social programs. And so they got rid of Mobutu, and they ended up, laying waste to Congo. And now that's been basically, set into a state of anarchy where again, companies just plunder that country at will, right? And that's the new goal. They don't want a strong man over a unified nation. They just want to break up these nations so that there are no armies, there are no governments, again, who can tax companies, who can charge tariffs, who can set labor standards, who can set environmental standards. They've decided pure anarchy, mere anarchy, is what they want. And that's what they're creating. And can you imagine a worse thing for a people? Can you imagine living in that kind of situation? Where, again, Libya, great example, where now slaves are being sold in markets. Okay, that is the future that the West wants for all the nations of the global South, and maybe even beyond there. I think in the end, if they're willing to do it to those people, they're willing to do it to us too. I mean, at some point, they're going to decide, that we deserve the same fate. So this needs to be resisted. Netanyahu said it. I actually said it well. He said it's a battle between light and darkness, civilization and barbarism. It's just that he had it reversed. It's Israel and the U.S. and the West that's on the side of darkness and barbarism. That I'm very clear on.
Yes. And I think that's an excellent point to bring our discussion to a close for today, Dan. I think it's been a very insightful back and forth we've had today. Just invite you, before we close out, to if you've got anything to plug or you want to recommend anywhere where people can go and find your work.
Yes. Well, first of all, thanks again for having me on your show. I'm a avid watcher of it as well. So my latest book is The Case for Palestine: Why It Matters, Why You Should Care, which you can pick up on Amazon or your local bookstore. If it's not there, they can order it for you. Or you can buy my books at skyhorsepublishing.com. And you can find me on Twitter at Daniel M. Kovalik.
All right. Thank you for joining us today, Dan Kovalik, and we hope you will join us at some point in the future for further discussions as the decline of the dark side of things continues.
Absolutely. Thanks, Alexander. And I want to say hi to my friend Nayla if she's listening today. Hey, Nayla.
She's almost certainly is, and I say hi as well, comrade, and hope you're doing good. All right. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Take care.
Oh, Stalin was a mighty man, and a mighty man was he. He led the Soviet people on the road to victory. All through the revolution, he fought at Lenin's side, and they made a combination till the day that Lenin died. He said, come on, you people, we must work with brain and hand. And then one day the Nazis came into the Soviet land. They plundered to the Volga, to Stalingrad. And then Joe Stalin said, come on, me boys, and kicked them out again. Oh, Stalin was a southerner, in Georgia he was born, where the oranges grow thick and fast and fields of waving corn. And Stalin is a farmer, his fingers they are green, and he has planted the biggest crop the world has ever seen. One day he looked upon the map and frowned and shook his head. There's too much brown and not enough green, these were the words he said. We'll have to change the weather, boys, he said, and then he smiled. So let's begin by planting trees along 3,000 miles. So Stalin rolled his sleeves up then and said it's time to start. The Volga River and the Don, they are too far apart. I think we'd better join them, so come and help me, pal, and we'll build a mighty waterway, the Volga-Don Canal. Then Stalin went into the north, and there saw rivers three, all emptying their waters into the polar sea. Now that's not right, Joe Stalin said, these rivers, they are ours. We'll turn them round and make them work and make electric power. There was a range of mountains that were standing in the way, so Stalin put his hand out and smoothed them all away. For Joe, he is determined to make the land all green, and that's the biggest project that the world has ever seen. Oh, Stalin is a mighty man, and he has a mighty plan. He's harnessed nature to the plow to work for the good of man. He's hammered out the future, the fortunate he has seen, and he's made the worker state the best the world has ever seen.